At his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away to be with the angels, to be with Abraham. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham from far away with Lazarus by his side.
He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames."
Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us.
He said then, "Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment."
They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them.
He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent."
If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. I do want to wish a happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Our sermon this morning is going to have absolutely nothing to do with Father's Day, so there. If you're looking for something, that's all you're going to get, so savor it while it lasts. We are continuing our sermon series in the parables of Jesus, and this morning I want you to begin by imagining that you set up an appointment with your financial advisor. Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. The time comes and you head to the offices there, and you are greeted by the receptionist who informs you that your financial advisor no longer works for the company. What they have decided to do is they are going to substitute a new financial advisor. You need to meet with him at least one session, and if things don't work out, you can request a different financial advisor. So you agree to do that, and you head into the office, and when you do, the guy looks eerily familiar. You stand there and say, "Do I know you from somewhere? Have I seen you somewhere before?" And the financial advisor says, "Sure you have. I'm Jesus." And I want us to think about how you would react at that moment that you find out you're about to have a financial session with Jesus. I suspect there's some various responses we might have. Some of us might think, "Jesus, you need to go back to the church where you belong. I don't know why you're here talking to me about finances. You deal with spiritual things, and this clearly has nothing to do with you." And so some of us might think that Jesus should just go back to the little corner of church where he likes to play. Why is he serving as a financial advisor? Others might feel like when they find out that Jesus is offering to be their financial advisor, they might feel like they just kind of want to hide the books from him a little bit. Like, I don't really want to open up in front of Jesus all of the numbers and let him see all of the things that I'm doing because I'm afraid that he might not approve of what I'm doing. And others might, with delight, say, "I'm thankful, finally, Jesus, that you're going to look at the books and that you're going to be able to tell me what I ought to be and what I should be doing with my finances." You see, we've been going through the parables of Jesus, and our last 2, and now including this third one, has dealt a lot with our finances, with our financial resources, and Jesus has been advising us in the process. And so yet again, once today, we are going to have a parable that deals primarily with wealth and with riches and with our finances. The parable, I think, is a continuation of one that we looked at last week, the parable of the unjust steward. See, it was in that parable that, as a part of the conclusions that Jesus was sharing, that he shared with us that we ought to use our unrighteous wealth in such a way that when it's gone, that they will welcome us into eternal homes. And as people are thinking about and reflecting on the implications of that, Jesus saying that we need to do big things with this little thing called money, we come to find out that the parable was initially shared with Jesus' disciples. They are the ones who heard him speak of it in Luke 16, verse 1. But then in verse 14, we find out that there's another group that has actually been listening to that parable. The Pharisees, who loved money, they also heard the parable and they ridiculed him. See, they would fit in that group of people who look at Jesus and say, Jesus, you need to go back to talking about the things that you know because you clearly don't know anything about this whole financial picture that we're talking about. See, in their mind, it's pretty clear to know what the role and the purpose of wealth is. If you are a child of Abraham and you have a lot of wealth, that means God approves of you. That means that God is blessing you, that you're clearly on God's side, and yet Jesus is insinuating that somehow wealth might be dangerous to our future, or that if we don't use it properly, it might somehow not influence our future positively. And so they ridicule Jesus because Jesus clearly doesn't understand the kinds of things that they understand about wealth and God's economy with wealth. And so then as a result, Jesus will tell them their own parable. And as we look at this parable, I want you to envision it like 4 pictures. The first half as we look at it, Jesus is going to show us one picture, and then a second, and then a third, and then a fourth. And as we step back and look at all 4 of those pictures, that's where we're going to get the sense of what Jesus is teaching us this morning. And so the first picture is in Luke chapter 16, verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. Did you ever watch that show, The Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? And Robin Leach would find a different wealthy person, and he would go in and he would just show off all of their things. He would talk about these champagne wishes and caviar dreams. People with massive houses, exotic cars, the best of everything. See, as Jesus introduces us to this first picture, he is painting one of these lifestyles of the rich and famous sort of pictures. When he talks about being dressed in the purple robes, that's kind of the clothing of the wealthy and the clothing of royalty. Today we might talk about a person wearing a suit made by Oscar de la Renta. We might talk about a person wearing Gucci shoes or having a Louis Vuitton shirt. I mean, this person has the best of the best. And while most of us might on occasion have this big celebratory feast, maybe it's a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing. Every day, this man made it a regular practice of having some of the best foods and some of the best drinks that are available to him. And so we're introduced to the man who has everything. But as the camera crew of the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, as they're walking out of the man's estate, one of the guys leaves his camera on when it should have been off. And as he walks past the gate, out of the corner of your eyes, you get a glimpse of a man in tattered clothing. And you're probably struck by this second picture. And so Jesus introduces us now to the second picture when he says, "And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores." The difference is jarring and it is disturbing. And I wonder what we'd notice first. I mean, would it be his gaunt body? Would it be the numerous ulcer-like sores that he has all across his skin? Would it be the tattered and the ragged clothing? Whatever it is, something would catch our attention after having seen that elegant picture, to see a man in this kind of condition. And as the parable is introduced, one of the things that we, I think, are to realize is this man likely has some sort of a physical disability. The language that Jesus uses that's probably referenced better in other translations is that the man was laid there. It emphasizes his passivity. This was not his idea. This was not his place, but somebody else decided this is the place that you should be. And as you think about these sores that develop, they probably develop because of his inability to deal with the things that come up on his body. As the dogs come and lick his sores, why doesn't he just run away? Maybe, probably, because he can't. So he is a man who is dependent on others to provide what is needed. And that's the very reason when his friends say, what are we going to do with this guy? They say the best thing that we can do with him is take him to the gate of the rich man. In fact, in a lot of ways, we find that this man parallels somebody who we met in Luke 15, the prodigal son, where that prodigal son, he longed to eat the pods that even the pigs were eating, and he was surrounded only by an unclean animal. we now find another person who longs to eat what falls from the rich man's table, who is surrounded only by unclean animals. But what's the difference between those two? The rich son had an option. He could go back to his father. But this man's only option is that this rich man would offer to care for him. And so he longed to eat even just the very things that would fall, the crumbs that would come from his table. And there's an irony in the picture because this man is named. One of the only people that's named in a parable. And his name is Lazarus, which means God helps or God has helped us. And as you look at these two pictures, if one of them were going to be named Lazarus, which one would you give the name Lazarus to? To the guy who is covered in sores with dogs licking him, saying, oh, clearly this is the man that God has helped. There's a part of us that should really sense the injustice of this. This is certainly not the man that God has helped. This is the man, it seems, that has been abandoned and has been forsaken by God. But what if this rich man heard the parable of the unjust steward? What would he do? What ought to he have done? He could have looked at this poor man as an opportunity to use unjust wealth in a way so that when it's gone, you might be received into eternal homes. There is an opportunity there. In fact, the poor man is placed by a gate. And the gate is on hinges, which means the gate is very easy to open. The rich man's access to an opportunity to use his wealth today, which is little, to build up true riches in the future is right there. All he has to do is to use the hinges that are already there, open up the gate, and welcome the man in. But this rich man's theology is more like the theology of the Pharisees. Why do I care about that guy? Because clearly I'm rich. I am a child of Abraham, and so I have nothing to worry about. I have my golden ticket. I have my approval from God that nothing more is required of me. And so I'm going to eat and drink and be merry. And he misses the invitation that Jesus offered in the parable to address his situation. And so then we are now introduced to a third picture. Luke chapter 16, verse 22, the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. We see a reversal of fortunes. People who are people of faith, we realize that death will change everything. Death will clarify the things that it needs to clarify. Death will correct the things that need to be corrected. Death really is the fulcrum that's at the middle of these things here. And so wise people live today with the assurance and with the reality of death. And so Jesus paints the picture of this poor man now in an honored position near Abraham. But the picture, this third picture of the poor man, is actually passed over quickly because Jesus wants to get to this fourth picture. And so here's picture number 4. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and he saw Abraham from far away with Lazarus by his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. Now, we're going to step aside from the parable for a moment, and we're going to just address a common question that comes up here, which is, what's going to happen when I die? And some people will say, let me answer that question. Let's turn to this very parable. My encouragement is for us to be cautious about using this parable as a doctrine for what happens when we die. What Jesus is doing is he is using actually a very common story format in order to communicate something. So the setting here is not what Jesus is teaching. The setting is in order to teach something else. Let me give you an example. There was a man who died, and when he went to heaven, and at the pearly gates, he came out and was greeted by St. Peter. And Peter said to him, and I actually don't have anything more to say about that, but I just wanted you to realize you recognize that format, don't you? You've heard it before. Now, if I were to tell you a joke that had all those elements, do you think you would go home and call your friend and say, did you know that Craig believes that there's actually going to be pearly gates? And that it's not Jesus who's going to judge us, but it's going to be St. Peter, and you build your whole doctrine about what happens based on a joke. In a very similar way, this parable, this format has been around long before Jesus. You can read story after story of myths that have the very same sort of elements, where you have these divides and people in their fates are having conversation. The closest examples to Jesus, there's one by Plato and there's one by Plutarch. In other words, Jesus is not creating something to say, let me tell you what heaven is going to be like, or let me tell you what's going to happen when you die. He's saying, here's a story format you're already well familiar with. Let me use that to illustrate something. So be cautious when we use this parable to give illustrations about what happens when we die. I think the point is not the form. The point is what the form is teaching. So the question becomes, what then is the form teaching? Well, we certainly are to be comparing these pictures. So by this point, we now have 4 pictures. And one of the key things that Jesus is showing us is this great reversal of fortunes. There's a reversal in several elements. The first is in terms of torment. In the first and second pictures, it was the poor man who was tormented. And yet in the third and fourth picture, it is the rich man who was tormented. The one who needs mercy alters completely. In pictures 1 and 2, it is the poor man who needs mercy, but in pictures 3 and 4, it is the rich man who needs mercy. Both of them have just very small requests. In pictures 1 and 2, it's the poor man who says, I just want a few of the things that fall from the rich man's table. And in picture 3 and 4, it's the rich man saying, I just want Lazarus to dip his finger in water and just give me a drop of water. You see, their fortunes have completely shifted and altered. See, those who are wise will use money in light of the fact that a day is coming when all our fortunes can be reversed. When those who in this time find themselves to be first may in fact find themselves to be last. When those who are well off may in fact find themselves to be treated poorly. Luke 16:25, but Abraham said, Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in a like manner evil things, but now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. See, Abraham's response comes with it another kind of chilling reminder, a paradox of names again. Because Abraham calls this man his child, which for those Jewish Pharisees, that's all that you need. It's for Abraham to call you his child. And then clearly Abraham will reach out and will bless you. But yet there is the recognition here that though this man is rich, that though this man is in fact a child of Abraham, something significant is amiss for him. And there will be a great reversal. Jesus told us in Luke 6:21, Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Or verse 25, Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. What would happen if there was a great reversal? So let's talk about the rich man and why he was tormented. I think our interpretive value comes in answering this question. Some people take the shortest pathway between parable interpretation and they say, here's the interpretation. All poor people go to heaven, all rich people don't. And so the problem with the rich man was simply that he was rich. Were he not rich, that would solve all of his problems. But there's an issue with that interpretation. There's not just one rich person in this parable, but in fact there are 2 rich people, are there not? There's a man in this parable who is described in the scriptures as extremely wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. That's Genesis 13:2 in reference to Abraham. Abraham is the quintessential rich man. So if the whole point of this is rich men don't go to heaven, then what is Abraham doing there? We would have a serious problem that we have to figure out. So the man's problem is not that he was wealthy, but it seems to be that in his wealth there was some things that he neglected or that he did not do. And again, as we put this parable very closely to the parable of the unjust steward, it seems pretty clear that what this man is, in fact, is an example of somebody who does not do anything Jesus taught in the first parable. So, this man is an example of one who does not use dishonest wealth so that when it is gone, that he would gain welcome into eternal homes. This man is also one that he's not responsible with this little thing called wealth, and so how could we expect him to receive these greater riches? This man is an example of what it looks like to not serve God, but instead to serve money. And so this man is all of the things that you ought not to do in light of Jesus' teaching of the unjust steward. He did not do or practice any of the kinds of things that Jesus had instructed in the previous parable. So in many ways, what we could say is that this rich man illustrates a poor way to be rich. He did not manage that which was temporary in light of the future. See, what this man does, and seems to typify the people in the parables who Jesus has painted negatively, is he lives his life financially without a regard for others. You remember that rich fool who built his barns, but he wasn't rich towards God? Remember, Jesus commends the dishonest steward because he used what he had today in such a way that would benefit him tomorrow. You remember the parable of the Good Samaritan when they say, hey, who is my neighbor? And the answer is, everyone who you encounter is your neighbor. And so this man is kind of like the culmination of all these parables, saying, here's the worst example. And this was what kind of thing will happen to those who disregard Jesus' instructions. So then Luke 16:26, besides all this, between you and us is a great chasm that has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us. See, during this man's life, there was a gate. And that gate was on hinges, and it could easily be opened and easily be. But during his life on earth, he never opened the gate. And now at a point where he says, okay, I'm realizing there was probably a mistake done. Now let's see if we can somehow bridge the divide. And he is told at this point, there is a great chasm that is fixed. In other words, at the point of death, you can no longer go back and say, okay, now I want to go back now, and I want to undo what I did. Those choices and these choices that we're making today, Jesus say, will be at one point fixed choices. I mentioned last week about the Canadian $2 bill being devalued. If I wait till after January and I say, hey, I've decided I actually do want to spend this in a store, I missed my opportunity and I missed my time. See, for this rich man, he comes to find out that that opportunity had to use this little thing called money in a way that would build up eternal things. He missed out on that opportunity. And Jesus will give us in this lesson this open-ended message. Because the rich man, he wants to go back to his brothers. He wants them to have the message, the warning about what is coming, about what is going to be done. And he's saying, hey, can you send Lazarus? And Lazarus is going to go tell them, and then they're going to change. And Abraham says, no. They have Moses. They have the prophets. If they're not going to listen to them, what makes you think they're going to listen when someone rises from the dead? And the parable ends with a very open ending. It's open in the fact that we don't know what happens, do we? I mean, things are fixed for this rich man. His fate is sealed in a chasm that cannot be altered. But for the brothers, they still have an opportunity to change. But do they? But will they? And it's also open-ended for the Pharisees, is it not? Their fate is still open. Are they going to respond to Jesus' teaching about wealth and about money? Or are they going to refuse to repent? But open-ended parables are not just about the open ending for those who find themselves in the parable. Open-ended parables ultimately ask us to say, and what about us? Our gate is still there. It can still be easily opened, and it can still be easily closed. And so what are we going to do with the teachings of Jesus? And in fact, I'll let you know you have a little bit of an advantage over anyone in this story. What the rich man wanted was for a voice to go out to say, this is what's happening, and tell my brother what's happening. Abraham is saying, we're not going to do it. And guess what? We have the recording. We have the voices from the dead that are saying, I made a huge mistake, and I want to warn you not to make a mistake. And guess what? We are living. Most of you, mostly living. We are living, which means we have an opportunity when? Today. So our situation is not fixed. Our parable is still ongoing. Our invitation is still open. What are we going to do with our money? See, even after these sessions of the financial advice of Jesus, I think we probably find we still have questions, don't we? I mean, I've got questions. Okay, so how big of a barn can I build that's cool? And how big of a barn is too big? Or if I'm the rich man, so how many crumbs do I have to give him? And yet we've learned that the parables are not so much about answering all the questions we have. In fact, sometimes parables introduce more questions than the questions that they answer. Maybe a part of what Jesus is trying to teach us with money is that we need to be willing to wrestle with our questions. That the process of wrestling is more virtuous than having standards and these ready-made answers. I read a story this week about a church that in their small groups, they practice financial accountability with each other. They talk about financial choices they're making, financial decisions. And in the story, one of the church leaders said, we even have some groups that share their tax returns with each other. Oh, and there was terribly negative response from people. Because we've heard of churches that say you can do this and you can't do this, and people were very concerned that that's what this church was doing. But in his response, this church explained and expressed their situation by saying, we do not enforce standards, but we encourage queries. What do the Pharisees want? They want standards. They want lines in the sand. They want clear-cut answers about how many feet wide can my barn be and how many feet high can my barn be, and I'll make sure I keep it underneath that, and then I'm going to go on living my life however I want. And yet Jesus' way seems to be, what if instead of standards, you just keep querying and asking, I wonder. See, as a part of our financial management and our financial oversight, we need to learn to use the words yes and the word no. Seems to me that we often have an issue at some point in our lives with making a mistake with either one of these two words. With our finances, we say yes to things we should say no to, and we say no to things that we should say yes to. And again, we're going to want an answer, aren't we? Tell me what things to say yes to and what things to say no to. Like, how many purple robes can I have in my closet and still be fine? Or how about this question? How many celebrations can I have in my lifetime and that not be too much? See, the interesting thing is this word of the celebration of this rich man who every day he feasted sumptuously. It's the exact same word that was used in Luke 15 where it talked about the father who said, your son is back and now we're going to celebrate. So the line isn't saying we don't do this and we don't do this. It is asking us to recognize the uniqueness of each of our situations. And sometimes we will say yes to things and sometimes we will say no to things. But everything I think that we do as Christians is going to be based on two yeses. The first yes is not, in fact, any yes that we say, but is the yes that Jesus said. Jesus said yes when the Father said, will you go to earth? Jesus said yes when the Father said, will you live among them incarnate as a man? Jesus said yes. Will you give your life on a cross? And Jesus said yes to that. And after that good news event, the question for all of us who live on this earth is, am I going to say yes to him? And once we say yes to him, we are simultaneously saying yes to a lot of other things. Yes to his oversight of our finances. Yes to eternity. We're saying yes to the fact that we believe that we're going to die. Yes to the fact that we believe we're going to be judged. Yes to the fact that we believe that that is going to be an unchangeable moment. You see, when we say yes to Jesus, we are saying yes to all of his teachings and all of the implications of life with him. And so saying yes to Jesus means we're saying yes to some form of financial mutuality. I mean, as a follower of Jesus, my money is never my money. It's always God's money, isn't it? And my decisions with my money is never my decisions with my money. It's this sense of mutuality, and this seems to me the theme of the people who get in trouble in these parables is they did not have regard for others as they managed their wealth. And so I want to just finish with this illustration that often is something I think about when I'm making financial decisions, is the difference between a dam and sprinklers. Both, of course, are created by humans to do something with water. Even the very creation of a dam, one could create a dam in order to fairly distribute and to create an even flow of water distribution. But somebody could also create a dam. Why? Because I just want to make sure anytime I'm thirsty, I've got plenty of water. And did you know there's people dying downstream? Well, that's not my problem, because as long as I've got water, that's all I care about. See, as we look at our finances, I think the one thing that Jesus continually pushes against is this idea that we're building up a dam that as long as I can drink, that's all that matters. But instead, the picture seems to be one of the sprinkler. What's the sprinkler's function? What is it supposed to do? It's supposed to take water that's coming through a very narrow thing and disperse it. So remember why God blessed Abraham? He blessed him so that he would be a blessing. God wanted Abraham to be the sprinkler. Where the Pharisees got off track was they started building dams where they were supposed to build sprinklers. And so this week, as we go out into the world, as we're involved in conversations, as we're cashing paychecks, as we're setting budgets, I think it's just worth us asking the question, am I just building a dam here? Or am I using the blessings that I've received to ensure that I'm being a blessing to others? God's calling is for us to be a blessing to others. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And we remember, as we go out, we don't go out with our own resources. We go out with the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and with the fellowship of the Holy Spirit.